Hi, welcome to our home whiskey bar. Welcome to our new YouTube channel, Wise Whiskey. I'm Tony, and thank you for joining us. Before I get into the first video, I did want to take a couple minutes just to tell you guys kind of what I hope this channel can become, the reason I'm putting another whiskey channel out there, how I hope we're a little different, and kind of the plan for the future. I imagine this video will be just a little bit longer than what I would normally hope to put out in the future, just because of all that. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Tony Wise, and I spent 13 years in the beer and liquor business in Texas. I recently moved out of that industry and out of state to Springfield, Missouri with my family, and have started a new career, still in sales, but nothing to do with alcohol anymore. And there's several YouTube channels that I have loved watching over the years to help me learn more about whiskey. And so that's kind of my hope here, is that since I do have that knowledge, that I can help bring some of it to folks. I do think with my background, that hopefully I can provide some insights and some points of view that are maybe different than most of the YouTube channels out there. And then the last couple of years, I worked as a liquor distributor in Austin, San Antonio, focused on, in particular, Sazerac. So, the Buffalo Trace portfolio of whiskeys was one of the brands we got to carry. So obviously that was a lot of fun to represent and support. So I've done, I can't even tell you how many hundreds of tastings and events over the years. And I feel like I learned a lot about what it takes to successfully taste a product to someone that doesn't have a lot of understanding of that category or that product type, or maybe just doesn't know that brand, and help them be more comfortable with it and more open to it when they start. And I find that even if you end up not liking a product, when you try it that way, you do tend to have a better, more positive experience. And so this first video is the 7 bottles to get you into whiskey. Later, our next video will be Tasting 101. And so that one will go even a little further into how I like to taste something. And really get you into tasting whiskey. I plan on doing hopefully 2 videos a week. The idea would be that one video is more like this, where it's a countdown or a flight or a blind tasting, and then one is a little more educational. So that's kind of the hope and the plan. We'll have to see how the channel goes. Like I said, I started in the industry. I was actually a bartender for like a decade before that as well. So spirits is something I've been interested in and loved for a long time. And so with these 7 bottles, I wanted to knock off a couple categories. One, I wanted to give you options in a few different styles because everyone has different palates. And because of the popularity of bourbon, I think with most of us, our first experience with whiskey is bourbon. And it's not for everybody. And it is a little bit more of an intense, kind of brash style, which we'll get into more down the road in other videos. So I do have a couple bourbons. I have a couple of ryes, but I also have a couple Irish and Scotch whiskeys that I want to try today. And the goal here is to hopefully find something that you can enjoy that doesn't, overpower you and just tastes like gasoline, right? And so with each of these bottles, they should be readily available, pretty affordable. I don't think anything where I currently live, I don't think I have anything here that would be over $45. And most of these are going to be more in the like 25 to 35 range. So definitely affordable bottles that you should be able to find. Again, this is not me saying these are 7 bottles that are going to get you into whiskey because they're the 7 best whiskeys out there. These are 7 great representations of styles and categories that are affordable, easy to get, and have a great, approachable flavor profile. So to get started, Buffalo Trace Bourbon. As I said, I sold Buffalo Trace, represent Sazerac. Part of the reason I took that job is because I had already loved Buffalo Trace Bourbon. For years, when I went to bars, even before I really got into whiskey and knew it, my drink of choice when I sat down at a bar was Buffalo Trace or Maker's Mark on the rocks with a little splash of water. So bourbon on the rocks with a splash of water is something that I drank for years. It's something that I'll still order from time to time in the summer. So one of the things I really want to push with this channel is I don't want this to be pretentious. And people that tell you you can't drink your whiskey in a cocktail or with Coke or anything, they can get right the hell out of here. It's whiskey, it's supposed to be fun, and that's the #1 goal. So like I said, we'll do a bigger tasting video on our next video, but I do want to go through a couple hints and tips with tasting. First of all, I always like to roll my whiskey a little bit in the glass. It really doesn't matter what glass you use, but something that has a little bit of a shape similar to this where it'll kind of tighten up at the top. It does help hold some of those aromas in, help you get a better experience with that. Wine glasses make another good tasting glass, but honestly, you can sip this out of anything and you're still gonna get a good experience. These are called Glencairn glasses. They're one of the more popular styles. You can find them online at a ton of different places. They are a great glass for tasting whiskey. So, a couple things. When we sniff our whiskey and try to get some aromas going, some different types on the nose, we don't want to take big gas spin, just like when you were in like chemistry class back in school and they taught you to waft, right? Start off a little further back, work your way in. Especially if you're new to tasting, smelling the whiskey and sipping it early on, it's going to be really powerful and it's going to kind of overwhelm you. And that's normal. It took me a few weeks of regularly tasting spirits before I really got past the alcohol and really started getting into the more intricate flavor profiles. So it's okay if it mostly tastes like alcohol or smells like alcohol early on. Also, I highly recommend having water or something to drink to help in between your sips, or if it comes over a little strong. What I'm using today is actually one of my favorite things to sip on when I'm sipping whiskeys, if I'm not going to be drinking a ton of whiskey that night, because it is also beer. It's a Guinness, but because Guinness has nitrogen and not just CO2 in it, so it gives it this nice foamy head on there. It's very soft on your palate, but that little bit of carbonation does help to kind of clean your palate after every drink, so you're getting kind of a fresh approach. There's also not a lot of notes in Guinness that are really going to come through on most of these whiskeys, so I don't think it overpowers your palate or taints it in any way that is going to stop you from tasting what you should from the whiskeys. Having a little bit of alcohol, whether it's a beer or a little sip of a basic whiskey or something every time you start, it's nice to wake your palate up and get it used to a little bit of alcohol before you start doing a more intense tasting. So having said that, with our first sip here, we're going with the Buffalo Trace. We're going to do short little sniffs like a bloodhound. They call it the bloodhound method around the glass. I'm getting some brown sugar, some sweetness, maybe a little bit of cherry or cherry cola. You'll have to excuse our lovely dog Olaf. He is very opinionated. I have a feeling it'll be a recurring thing that happens in our shows. Okay, so now that we've done that, we're gonna go over our first sip. We're doing the short sniffs called the Bloodhound method. Again, some brown sugar, some caramel, some cherry. Not really a whole lot else. It doesn't smell like me, very much like alcohol. It is 90 proof, so it's not very high. But again, if you're newer to whiskey and trying this for the first time, it might smell very strong of alcohol to you. And it's also important that when we talk about what we smell or we taste, I'm not saying this is going to be like biting into a cherry or a scoop of brown sugar. It's more notes that remind you of that. Remember that scent is tied to memory. And so a lot of what you're getting is like a hint of that or a memory of that. Not so much, now every once in a while you drink something and it's like, man, that tastes just like that. But normally it smells like something and then it connects your brain to a memory of another smell. So really all you're trying to do is associate what you're tasting or smelling with something you have a memory of tasting or smelling. Okay. Also with your first sip, especially if you haven't had any other alcohol that day, approach your first sip like it's a very hot cup of coffee. Tiny sip, sip it through like super hot coffee. Don't try to get anything from it. Just get it on your palate and get it past it. Also, as you're getting used to tasting whiskey, it is okay if you don't swish it around, chew on it like some people say. You have to really enjoy it and really have the palate to do that. Frankly, I don't do that often. So, now that I've had a couple sips, a little bit of that brown sugar definitely does come through. There's a little bit of almost coconut, which is not something I would normally say with this, but that's kind of what I'm getting today. It might be something on my palate. A little bit of cherry for sure, which is a very common note from the Buffalo Trace distillery, in particular with Buffalo Trace. Not a lot of proof, or what they would say like finish. There's not a lot going on in the back. It doesn't evolve, which means it doesn't go through like a lot of different things and continue to change once it's there. It's a relatively straightforward, simple whiskey. One of the things I like to do when tasting whiskey and when helping people taste is instead of just focus on what notes can I pull out, I try to focus on what's happening on my palate as it goes through. So when I take this sip, at the very front of my palate, I get a little bit of burn, which could be the alcohol, which could be a little bit of rye spice. Then it's gone right away. There's nothing that stays on the front of my palate. It's not overly strong. It's not punching me when it comes in. As it goes through my tongue, or the mid palate, I'm definitely getting, that's where the brown sugar, a little bit of coconut and cherry sweetness comes through. And then on the back end, there's not really much there at all. Relatively straightforward. It kind of peels off and disappears. I don't get that, what they call the Kentucky hug, that warmth that kind of comes down and stays with you. I don't, have a lot of flavors lingering there and sticking with me. It's just kind of an easy sip, a little punch of proof, some sweet notes, and then a nice clean finish. So again, if bourbon and those flavor profiles that I mentioned, brown sugar, coconut, cherry cola, if those are notes that you would typically gravitate towards, this might be a great beginner whiskey for you. So that was Buffalo Trace bourbon. Next, we're going to do Penelope Wheated. Now, wheated bourbons means that the second most used grain in the recipe is wheat. With Buffalo Trace, the second most used grain would have been rye. So it's always going to be at least 50% corn with bourbon, 51%. After that, they can mix it up. Wheated bourbons tend to be softer on the palate, usually not quite as sweet, but also not quite as spicy or intense. A lot of times they'll have more of a floral character, and a lot of times people associate wheated bourbons with being a more softer, kind of easygoing, approachable whiskey for beginners. So take a little sip to clean the palate. Again, this is a bourbon that's meant to be in the $30 to $40 range, usually about 35 bucks. Penelope brought this out to be kind of one of their more affordable, available everywhere releases. I do not believe it is age stated, so we can get more into that further down the road, but we know it's at least 2 years old because it is a bourbon. And this one is 95 proof, so again, not overly high. When you're starting out, 100 proof and below, I think is usually in a reasonable spot, as long as it's not a hot bourbon, if it's well made at all. Once you get over that 100 mark, that's where you can start getting into some more intense flavor profiles that you may want to wait until you've kind of built your palate up some. Now, this immediately, even though it is a bourbon, has a very different nose than the first one. There is a more bready, kind of grain forward note, which would make sense from a wheated bourbon. There is a softness to it and maybe a slight floral note, but mostly what I get is that little bit of graininess to it. Definitely less sweet smelling than the Buffalo Trace. Okay, so on the palate with this one, it really is this is a little bit higher proof. You never get that punch that you get at the very front of the Buffalo Trace. There's no rye spice or alcohol proof either way to give you that little punch. This comes on the palate and is immediately soft. And I don't know another word to describe that. It literally feels softer in your mouth. This might almost feel like there's a little bit of carbonation or like energy behind it. I don't know how else to explain it. This doesn't have that. It does have a little bit more viscosity to it. So it's a little slower across your palate, coats it a little more. It's a different type of sweet, almost like bread with a little bit of honey on it. So it's very soft, very approachable. It's really lovely. It's a really nice sip. I haven't had that in a while, but it's just a different experience, even though it is another bourbon. This is a great Probably over Buffalo Trace if you want to try a bourbon and get into it. If the notes of malt and grain and honey, like wheat bread, softly baked, if that's kind of a flavor profile you enjoy, I highly recommend this. It's really hard to beat that. That is, I forgot how good that is actually. Again, relatively one note, not a ton going on, not a lot of finish, but just a really nice, approachable pour. Now, next I have ryes because it's kind of common to go from bourbon to rye. But now that I think about it, I'm gonna move these two guys down to the end because they do have a little bit more complexity going on. So we're actually gonna jump over to our international whiskeys. So next, what I think frankly could probably be everybody's first pour of whiskey and they would become whiskey fans. I genuinely love this bottle that much, is Redbreast 12. Now, the thing about Redbreast 12, in my market here, they have it very affordable right now. It is the most expensive bottle that I have today, but definitely worth it. It was significantly more on the shelf when I was in Texas and still in the industry. Now, maybe they lowered the price there as well. I can't tell you, but I do know that here they've got a great price point on it. Redbreast 12 is from Ireland. It's a style that is only made in Ireland called single pot still Irish whiskey. They use malted and unmalted barley in this, and they use only a pot still, which is a more small batch, painstaking process. Most of these other whiskeys we have here today are going to be used on a column still or with column still and pot still combined, or on a doubler, which is a lot like a pot still, but slightly different. With pot still whiskeys, you do tend to get a little bit more flavor and complexity even in a younger or a lower proof whiskey. Now, Redbreast is only 80 proof. And so this is the lowest. Typically 80 proof would be a pretty big mark against a whiskey. You're usually only gonna see that with really mainstream high volume brands that are meant for wells, for mixing with sodas and such. You don't have a lot of higher end, high quality whiskeys at 80 proof. Redbreast is absolutely one of the exceptions to that rule. Now, with this being an Irish whiskey, you are going to notice a very different. Excuse me. With this whiskey, you are going to notice a very different flavor profile from the first two. There will be some similarity in the notes to the Penelope Wheated, but I'm telling you, when you try them side by side, they're nowhere close. Redbreast has a very unique kind of shortbread cookie, is a note that I've heard from a lot of tasters online and professionals. And I don't know if I agree with that completely, but I also have not come up with a note that I think is better than that. So I get where they're coming from. There's a buttery, almost sweetness to Redbreast 12. It comes into a grainy note as well. It's bready, but it's also not. It's sweet, but it's also savory. It's just a really, really cozy whiskey. This is one of those that I can enjoy at any time, anywhere, and it's just an amazing, easy pour. So, on the nose, I definitely get that kind of buttery pastry, almost like, you know what, almost like when my wife is making pie crust and we haven't baked it yet. And then it does go maybe slightly to more like a maltier, grainier, bready type note. Now, being 80 proof, absolutely no burn, no punch at the front of the palate. It does get down the palate to your tongue a little bit before you really start to get it. There's almost this tea-like note that when it finally hits, almost like a cup of tea. And then you just start to get that buttery kind of baked goodiness. Like, it's so, just like I said, comforting and cozy. I don't know that I get a lot of other notes from it than that, but gosh, it is really good. There is no finish on this. There's no burn. It is just absolutely approachable, slightly warming, but not in a Kentucky hug way, just on the palate. I cannot stress enough that if you've never tasted any kind of whiskey, I think Redbreast 12 is an amazing place to start. If you have had Redbreast 12 and you enjoy it, another single pot still whiskey that I highly recommend, is Green Spot, which is going to have a little bit of like green apple and coconut flavor. It's similar to Redbreast. I believe it has a little more proof to it, but it does have a little bit more going on flavor-wise as well. That is more expensive. Also, I've got the Powers John's Lane and Three Swallows. Those are both single pot stills as well. They are interesting. They are good. I prefer Redbreast 12 and Green Spot over them, but they do bring their own unique qualities both, and are both in a similar price range to the Redbreast and the Green Point. Now next, this has become one of my go-to daily drinkers. This is just a bottle of whiskey that I enjoy and go to regularly. I bought it years ago the first time when I first started getting into whiskey. And honestly, I wasn't, I don't know, blown away by it. And I don't know if I didn't understand the style at that time, if I didn't let it open up and give it a chance or what. But I came back to it a couple years ago with my wife when we started doing some blind tastings. And it does considerably better than I expected. And that is Teeling Small Batch. So this is a non-chill filtered, 46% Irish single malt whiskey aged in rum cask. So Teeling is a relatively new distillery in Ireland. They just a few years ago started up. Ireland got to where really there was only a couple producers left in the country. Everything made from Ireland was made into distilleries. And now there's a handful more that have opened, starting to have kind of a little bit of a craft renaissance there. And Teeling makes some really fantastic stuff. This is a $35 bottle, I believe. Just really unique and different. So right away, I mean, it smells like nothing else we've smelled today. I assume that's the rum cask influence on there. But it's slightly sweet, like creme brulee. Maybe some coconut, although I could just be thinking of rum and influencing myself that way. It's bright, a little bit of citrus. No oak, no tannic oak at all, like you get with some of the bourbon, although the two that I tried today don't really have a ton of oak in them. But also no maltiness or graininess like almost all these have had a little bit of. On the palate, again, no burn, no punch on the front, no spice. You get, man, it's really interesting because it's almost like you're drinking two whiskeys at once. Over your tongue, there's a slight savory note. I'm having a hard time placing, but it's very soft, similar to when we drink the Penelope. It feels soft. It has a little bit more viscosity, a little bit more mouthfeel on your palate. And then almost a little bit of baking spices. But then over the top of that, kind of on the roof of your mouth, you get this kind of sweet, coconutty that kind of comes and goes. And it doesn't feel like it's fully on your palate, but it's there. That may not make a lot of sense to you guys, but I'm just trying to paint for you what I'm experiencing as I get it. Let me take one more sip of this one. It's a hard one today for me to pinpoint any specific flavors or notes. It's extremely enjoyable. It feels like it's the sweetest, yet the most savory also that we've had. So it's very balanced. It does have different things happening at the same time. Without a doubt, the most complex whiskey we've tried so far today. It doesn't have a ton of evolution or finish, which means like what you experience on the palate is still kind of what you get. And honestly, that should happen with all these whiskeys. They're not overly aged. They're not, super expensive whiskeys. But there's just more going on there than with the other ones. Definitely a whiskey that even for the price point that I think you can sit with for a little while and sip on and think about and enjoy. I think pairing that with some foods or some snacks, doing some different things with it, it's just an interesting whiskey. And for $35, most places, even if this was a $45 or $50 whiskey, it's more than worth that. But I think this is just an unsung hero, possibly the best value of all the bottles I'm going to show you today. The next one here is a competitor for that, but just a really great pour. And I have had this at other places and other bottles since that original one, and they've all been really strong. So yeah, I highly recommend Teeling small batch. Particularly, it's unique for a distillery to put out a flagship affordable line with a unique finish like a rum cask. That's not something you see, right? And they really don't push the fact that it's rum cask finish, which is interesting. Barrel finishing is one of the videos that we will do in a later episode. Okay, so next we have the Naked Malt. This is a blended malt Scotch whiskey. That means that it is made with 100% barley, but that it is a blend of Scotches from different distilleries blended together. Now this is sherry cask finish. Sherry is a wine that's made in Spain. It's used often to age Scotch whiskeys in particular. And these were first fill sherry casks, which means that after the sherry came out of it, the next thing that went into it was the whiskey in this bottle. So you're going to get more of the sherry character when it's a first fill cask. Because one of the things you'll see in Scotch whiskey is sometimes barrels are used multiple times. And so the amount of influence they have or what they impart on there changes drastically because they may have been used multiple times. Okay, so on the nose, this is buttery. This is like buttercream, almost like Chardonnay. It's so buttery. It's like buttercream frosting. A little bit of fruitiness to it as well. Almost like if you had buttercream frosting and strawberries or like cherries on it. Like it's red fruit, it's berry. And then a little bit of maltiness. I will tell you that most times when you try Scotch, if you're not used to them, there is a mustiness from the 100% malted barley that a lot of times American drinkers are not used to. It's something that caught me off guard for a long time. And it's something that I struggled with when I tried Scotch for a long time. This is one of the few bottles that I get almost none of that malted barley mustiness. So I do think this is a great way to try the style, to be kind of initiated to the style. So Naked Malt. Oh, and this is gonna be 43%. So again, not super high, but on the higher end of what we're doing today. But non-chill filtered and non-colored. And you know, one of the things that's different, Scotch and rye or bourbon and rye in America cannot have color added to them. Scotch can. And a lot of the major brands, the big producers, do put color in their whiskeys. But this is non-colored and non-chill filtered. And as you can tell, Olaf is very passionate about distilleries putting color in their whiskey. It's something that bothers, I know, but I get mad about it too. Distillery transparency is something we're very passionate about in this household. So like I said, buttery, a little fruity, a little spicy. And typically, so you know, when you have a sherry forward whiskey, you are usually looking at kind of dark fruit, dark stewed fruit even, and then spice notes. So that definitely in line with the sherry forward. But this bottle, in most places, I believe this bottle is under $30, which is crazy because once you try it, I mean, it's a really nice whiskey. So this does have a little bit of punch right up front, but I've tried enough whiskeys to know that's not from the proof. That's the spice from the sherry cask coming in. And it's just this upfront little punch of spice, this little bit of character. And then the rest of this sip is just soft, luxurious, fruity buttercream. I mean, I really have no other, this is probably the only whiskey that tastes exactly like it smells in this lineup. And honestly, that's something too, is if you're newer to trying whiskey, it's very rare that a whiskey tastes just, I gotta tell you, if bourbons tasted like they smelled, I probably have a much worse drinking habit than I do now, because I usually love the way they smell. A lot of times that smell doesn't carry over to the taste. This is a whiskey that tastes almost identical to what it smells like. It is sweet, it is a little spicy, there's a touch of fruit without being overly fruity. It is just delicious. You can really see how the sherry cask have affected that and given it a unique flavor profile. But again, no burn on the finish, not a ton of evolution. Although I think the Teeling I said was the most complex so far, because it felt like there were almost multiple flavors happening at the same time. With the Naked Malt, there is a little bit more going on at the end. The whiskey stays with you a little while. It's subtle. And I find this with Scotch in general. Scotch tends to have more nuance and a little more complexity than American whiskeys in general. A lot of times, not in a way that's going to hit you over the head, but in a way that if you sit with it, you just start to find little things and you can get a more, there's also just a wider variety of flavor profiles in Scotch, from what I have found. Naked Malt, crazy good value, typically under $30. Cannot stress enough, if you're interested in getting into Scotch, Naked Malt is a great way to start. Next, we have a distillery I'm a big fan of, Redwood Empire. They're out of Northern California. And I love everything they do is every whiskey they make, I believe, is named after an actual redwood tree. And I love the artwork and the everything about the branding, which does mean something, right? This bottle in particular, I think of their entry level is the best one they offer. And this is called the Lost Monarch. And this is a Burr Rye. Now, that means it's a blend of bourbon and rye. I've heard a lot of people call these Boo Ryes. And I've drank a lot of bourbon. I've drank a lot of rye. I've never drank any whiskey with a boo in the name. So how Boo Rye became the way to pronounce a bourbon rye mix, I don't know. But even if it is considered correct, I refuse to say it. So this is a Burr Rye in my book. And it says it's aged at least 3 years. Again, I believe this was the $37.99, under $40, around that 35. And what I like about Burr Ryes is they're not my favorite style of whiskey, if I'm being honest with you. I've tried a few, and they're very hit or miss. This is probably my favorite that I've tried. But it is a great way if you're looking to try to get into rye whiskey. I was in craft beer, like I said, for over a decade. And what I found with craft beer is that hoppiness, an intense bitterness, that was kind of that bridge that people had to find a way to get over, right? It was a hill for them to climb. Once you get into that hoppiness, that's when craft beer would open up for you, and there's all these styles and this amazing beer. But you really had to find that gateway into the bitterness. What I have found is similar to that in whiskey, a high rye content is the same. That's why the wheated bourbons tend to be considered more for beginners. The higher the rye content in a bourbon, or once you get into Burr Ryes and ryes, that's when new drinkers start to get a little negative or a little hesitant. So having a Burr Rye that is really nice, but starts to give you those rye characteristics, it's a great way to get into that flavor profile. Unless you specifically love the notes that I give you for this whiskey, I would not say Lost Monarch is the whiskey to get you into whiskey. But if you've tried these other ones, if you're starting to get into whiskey, but you found that rye whiskeys are your Rubicon that you're just not willing to cross into yet, I think Lost Monarch is a great way to work towards that. So, on the nose, there's a little bit of herbaceousness, of herbal flavors there that come across that definitely set this apart from anything we tried so far. It doesn't smell overly alcoholic. I'm not getting a ton of crazy notes on this. There is a little bit of that brown sugar kind of bourbon sweetness. And then there's just this other note. I don't even know if I could name a specific herb, but there's just like a little bit of pine or herbal, like dill, that's hanging out there that tells you you're trying something different. On the palate, it's very sweet. There is a little bit more of an, at the front of your palate, kind of oomph. This is 45%. So again, in that 90 range, nothing incredibly high, but it is a little bit of that rye spice that can give you a little bit of oomph up front. But behind it, it almost goes into like bubblegum sweetness and a little bit of that brown sugar. So you do get this It's actually the most active up front because right at front, there's an herbal kick, but also the sweetness. And it's very sweet. And there's this little herbal dill note. This just has a lot going on with it, very up front. But as it goes across the palate, it just fades away. And so what I love about this as a gateway whiskey is some ryes can be very herb forward, some can be very minty, some can be very like bubblegum fruity. There's a lot of different notes on the rye spectrum. This one kind of gives you several of them. If I just sneeze again. It's almost like it was a bad idea to make this while I was sick. There were a lot of rye flavors on the spectrum. Sweetness, bubblegum, fruity, more bourbon-like that are brown sugar forward, cinnamon. You get spice notes like baking spices, and then you get those herbal notes like dill. Some are very mint forward. What's nice about this whiskey is you get a little bit of the sweetness, a little bit of the herbaceousness. You definitely know that you're messing with bourbon and rye, but then it's still very soft on the palate, and it just kind of, closes very easily. It hits you up front in a way that none of these other whiskeys do, but then it just kind of mellows out. Again, a really great pour. This is something that I go back to regularly. I really enjoy sipping on just day to day. I think it's a great sip of whiskey, a great way to work towards your rye whiskeys, but it's affordable and it's just not going to hit you over the head with any of the flavor notes with ryes that really made people uncomfortable or that people have a hard time getting past. I really do think this is a gateway kind of into that rye world. Redwood Empire, Lost Monarch. So lastly, for our straight rye, I have Michter's rye. Excuse me. I am a huge fan of the Michter's distillery overall. I'm actually going to start over on that because I just did a huge, super attractive. We should just let this run as it is and not edit it and show people what it is.
Gross.
All right, so last but not least, with our straight rye, we have Michter's rye. Michter's is a great distillery. Actually, they make another whiskey. Their American whiskey is one that I would consider having on this list, but I'm out of it. And I wanted to show videos for you, or show whiskeys in this video for you that I had on hand and could taste with you. Ideally, this channel will take off well enough that I can start spending more money on whiskey, and that won't be a problem in the future. If there's a bottle I want to put in a video, I can just go grab it. But right now, I am very much on our normal budget. And so we had to skip the Michter's American. Excuse me. So that is a whiskey that we'll come back to at some other time because it's another great one. I think everything these guys make is great. I'm a big believer in what Michter's does. My wife and I, on our 1-year anniversary, we didn't do a honeymoon. So we kind of did a honeymoon and 1-year anniversary trip together. And we did Whiskey Row in Louisville. And then we went out and did the Kentucky Bourbon Trail for a couple of days. And while we were in Louisville, we did the Fort Nelson bar at Michter's. And I think that was one of our favorite stops that we did. They had just a fantastic cocktail bar there with some really cool stuff, but you could also do flights and tastings of some of their higher end things. We also did a trip to Chicago last year for work. And while we were there, a bartender mistakenly poured me Michter's 10-year rye and charged me for for this bottle. So I got to try like a $200-something bottle of rye whiskey for like $7, which was fantastic. And still one of the best things that maybe has ever happened to me. I mean, like other than, getting a daughter and a wife and stuff, which I guess are up there. So with Michter's rye, you're looking at 84.8 proof, so definitely on the lower end. The nice thing about rye is because it does have more character to it, more flavor, The one thing you'll find in rye whiskey is that it doesn't need as much proof and it doesn't need as much age as bourbon to really deliver on flavor. It matures faster and it carries itself with a little bit more weight than bourbon does. Rye as a main grain just has more flavor to it. That's just a fact. So when we smell this, it's definitely on the sweeter side. You know you're not smelling a bourbon because there's a tannic and herbaceous note that you're just not going to get with bourbon. But it is sweet. There's bubble gum, there's brown sugar. But the tannic that I talk about is not oak, right? It's not barrel, it's not woody. It's almost vegetal or, like I said, herbal. But again, smelling this one, I can't tell you that I'm smelling a specific herb. It's just that there's something different there that's a little savory. On the palate, that is sweet. Excuse me. That is sweet with just a touch of a savory note to it. For being less than 90 proof, it has body and it has weight to it that some of these other whiskeys frankly don't. There's a little bit of spice on the end of it in a way that none of these other whiskeys have. Now, it doesn't hit you up front. Typically, when you're talking high proof whiskey, the proof is going to hit you up front. This doesn't do that. This is the only whiskey on here, even though it's one of the lower proof ones, that really has a finish to it and a little bit of a Kentucky hug. It just lets you know that there's something going on with it after you've sipped it. It follows past the palate. None of these other whiskeys in this lineup have done that. Yeah, in the mid palate in the back, there's just a little bit of spiciness, like baking spice, and a little bit of almost like carbonation, like fizz, that happens with that makes this whiskey stick around a little bit, even though it's under 80 proof, or under 90 proof, excuse me. Again, this is like a $45 bottle, most places. It is a single barrel. We're gonna do a video in the future that's on reading labels and understanding what bottled and bond, single barrel, small batch, a lot of this stuff means that we've talked about. But it is a single barrel, so for that price point, it's fantastic. Single barrel does mean that there can be some variance and that they're not all gonna taste the same, but I've never had a Michter's Rye that wasn't a mix of sweet and savory, a lovely, just a great bottle. Yeah, just another bottle you can't go wrong with. As I do this flight, I do have to give myself some props here. There's just not a bad pour here. And I would say that the biggest thing here is if you're wanting to get into whiskey, if you're wanting to learn and try it and you're new to it, is take the flavor notes I gave you and gravitate towards those that you would like in other things. If I told you that one of these tasted like bacon and you hate bacon, I would really hope that you don't go towards that one, right? So take the notes I gave you that sound the most interesting to you, that sound the most accessible, and try that as your first whiskey. And that's why I did 7, and that's why I did different styles. There is not a one key fits all whiskey, right? That just doesn't exist. But whiskey doesn't just have to be Scotch. It doesn't just have to be bourbon. And certainly doesn't have to just be Irish single pot still or rye. But there's so many different types out there. And it's a wide variety of flavors and notes that you can get. And so that is my hope that we can find as the channel moves forward, is I really want to help you feel more comfortable. It can be overwhelming going to a liquor store and seeing everything on the shelf. And my hope is that if you stick with us and you watch the channel for a while, you'll understand the types of whiskeys you're interested in and the types of bottles to go after. Once you know that, It's so fun going to a liquor store and bringing a couple bottles home because you know what you're picking up. You're not doing it just because the label looked neat or just because a friend told you to. You're doing it armed with just a little bit of information that can make a giant difference. So that's going to be the end of this first video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I know this has been kind of clunky, I'm sure, because it's our first time. I hope that we'll get better. I'm not making any big promises. Like I said, the next video is going to be about tasting a little more in depth. We're going to focus on just 4 or 5 whiskeys and really how to taste and compare. And I hope that if you stick with me and we get through this for a while, I don't want to use the word journey because I feel like that's super pretentious, but I hope we can take you on, fuck it, I hope I can take you on a journey where we can help you find what you like and what you're interested in and make you feel empowered enough to go out there and confidently pick out bottles to try that you think you're going to enjoy. So thank you for joining us. If there are educational topics or videos you would like me to see make, please leave that in the comments. I'd love to know where you're from and what your favorite whiskeys are, or maybe the first whiskey that got you into whiskey was in the comments as well. Please like and subscribe. That's the best thing you can do to help this turn into a channel that sticks around. And yeah, please drink responsibly. Please drink respectfully. And until I see you again, have a great day. Thanks.